Hello and welcome to our latest FLITe series webinar, Stories from Founders. This is a conversation with Megan Bingham-Walker and Natalia Dorfman. Natalia and Megan will be sharing their experience as InsurTech founders, hearing about their funding journeys, their hiring strategies, and what they've learned through this experience. Through our work at FinPro and off the back of our podcast, the Leadership in Insurance podcast, we're exposed to many issues that are topical or current. Sometimes we're in the position to do something about it in our role as a recruitment business that specializes in InsurTech. One issue that has often cropped up is the lack of female leadership in insurance technology businesses. 64% of employees in insurance are women, but only 18% are CEOs. This is nothing new nor surprising. We can see that the numbers are simply not representative in the traditional insurance industry. But in a nascent industry, one that in many aspects is so forward-thinking, it's disappointing to see this theme of gender inequality be mirrored. There are simply not enough female leaders. What can we do about that? Well, one thing at FinPro we can do is we're able to build networks and provide platforms for women in the industry. That's why we started the FLITe series, and that's why we're here with this webinar today, to provide a platform to hear from two inspiring female founders about their startup journey and what they've learned along the way. So, I always thought that's a kind of rough way to start. You're both under duress to be inspiring now, so I want to take that away. Megan, obviously the listeners to the podcast will have actually heard from you before because we've spoken in one of our episodes previously. But it'd be lovely if you could introduce yourself and the Anansi business, please.
So I'm Megan, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Anansi, and we are a digital goods in transit insurance platform for distribution partners and e-commerce merchants.
Wonderful, thank you. And Natalia, if you could do the same, that'd be wonderful.
Sure. I'm the CEO and co-founder of FLITe, and our vision is to be the world's first carbon insurer. So ensuring carbon removal on the voluntary carbon markets and really trying to help stop climate change.
Amazing. Thank you very much. And you're both, both the platforms are parametric solutions, aren't they, at some point of their core? No?
Ours is not. I think our vision is to end up with a portfolio of products, some of them being parametric, but some of them being traditional indemnity. And the first product we're going to launch is going to be a traditional indemnity policy.
Amazing.
Yes, we are parametric, not fully parametric, but as far as we can for some of the parcels.
Yeah. I'm so fascinated by it. And the reason I brought it up is because it's two very different sectors and solutions in the insurance industry. But yeah, parametric being used in a way that it's not an either-or solution. It's like part of the kind of suite of things that we can solve some of the insurance problems. So I thought that's quite interesting and fascinating businesses, and we'll get into those. I wanted to start with the fundraising journey. That's fairly recent in both of your histories. So, there's some shocking statistics around funding, particularly for female-founded teams. It represents just 2.8% of all capital invested in US startups last year, just as one figure. Perhaps I can start with you, Natalia, because it's so recent. How was that? What was your experience like of kind of fundraising? What did you learn? Yeah, let's start there.
I mean, so we just raised our pre-seed round, and we kept it intentionally small. We didn't want to over dilute ourselves. I guess I'd never raised a fundraising round before, so there was a huge learning experience just across the board. But I think we were in a fortunate position of being in sort of straddling two industries that VCs were very interested in, carbon removal, voluntary carbon markets, InsurTech. And so I found it overall to be, I guess, reasonably smooth. I think we had a lot of interest, and so on that front, I mean, I can't really complain. I think it probably went as well as it probably could have gone. I'm very much looking forward to our next round, which would be in October. And I feel now I know how to do it. And so I have this kind of plan of how I'm going to map it out and run it in a really smooth way. But in terms of the female founder statistics, I've definitely read those as well. And I didn't feel it. And I don't know if that's, I'm a female founder with two male co-founders. I don't know if that contributes or not. But I didn't feel anything. I felt we just got an overall amount of interest that I felt very gratifying.
Sure. Sure. I mean, that leads into the thing that, you know, good ideas will always get funded. I like to believe that, but then, you know, statistically, I suppose it's about opportunity as much as anything. Yeah, Megan, what was your experience of raising? Because you're slightly further along on the journey of your business. Yeah, paint a picture of where you're at in terms of funding and what your experience was.
Yeah, so we raised our pre-seed round last year. So that was led by Octopus Ventures. And we also had some angels who participated in that round. I would say that I would say we had a very different experience with Natalia. I mean, obviously, we're really grateful with how the round came together eventually, and we have some amazing investors, you know, surreal insurance industry leaders who are now on our cap table. But I think the process to get to that point was, you know, definitely not straightforward. And I mean, obviously, we've seen the statistics around female founders. So we are actually a 2 female founder team. So it's myself and my co-founder Anna is also a woman. And, you know, in addition to that, you know, I'm sure you've also seen the statistics of ethnic minority founders is also an even smaller minority of a minority. And I mean, I think, you know, I can see why Natalia may say it's, you know, you don't see it because, you know, often, you know, the feedback from investors isn't going to be, you know, a sort of a racist or a sexist slur or something really overtly sexist or discriminatory. But I mean, I think we've definitely had the experience. I mean, they often say that investors ask female founders a different sort of type of question to male founders. So they may ask more about, you know, what could go wrong with this investment rather than, you know, how big the vision could be. And, you know, so definitely it's more the subtleties around that, the how, you know, the whole investment process, the investment round, the feedback from investors and that sort of thing.
That's a really good point, a really interesting point as well. Did you? I just sort of say, like, I know it's you know, fundraising is a mixture of getting in front of people and not even sometimes getting that far, and they see a deck and they sort of polite decline, but just in terms of representation mirrored in the conversations, you know, in terms of the teams, building on from that point, Megan, did you have different experiences in terms of the diversity of the people that you were pitching to? Because, you know, famously, sort of the investor realm is not the most diverse portfolio of people either. Did you have better experiences maybe in more diverse teams that you were pitching to, or what was your experience like? Is there any data points to kind of draw on, or was it all this kind of homogenous middle-aged white guy sort of setup?
I mean, I think, you know, it's the onus is on you to really seek out a more diverse group of investors to pitch to. And we were part of the C Ventures network of female founders. And actually, I recommended you, Natalia, if you wanted to speak to them. But it's 2 women who've set up this organization to really support female founders with getting in front of investors. You know, that also helped us to get in front of a more diverse group of investors, certainly through being part of that network. And I would definitely recommend that to any female founder. Although saying that, I mean, we do only have 2 women who are investors on our cap table after all of that. So it's interesting because actually talking about statistics, I think the psychological studies have shown that, you know, even women who have senior sort of management positions within investors have often the same biases as men, because obviously what helped them to succeed in that environment is sort of a similar sort of adopting a similar type of approach. So I think the onus is on all of the individuals to really continue to challenge themselves to look within to see how they're sort of reviewing the investments they're looking at.
I agree. Actually, I think at some point, I mean, I think everything moves so quickly in a startup. This all actually feels a long time ago, but just remembering back, I remember saying to Paul and Tom at some point, I don't feel like I never speak to women anymore. Like, I only speak to men. I was like, I'd come from an environment at my last job where I worked with a lot of women at a large law firm. Not that that's the most diverse environment, but I happen to work with a lot of women. And I remember when we were doing all this fundraising, I never speak to women. Where are they? But then that said, you know, there are some funds which you can feel are more kind of female centric. But I remember that was quite striking to me. I suppose the other thing from our side is we came from Carbon 13, which is a venture builder for climate tech companies, which is where Paul, Tom, and I came together. And so just generally speaking on the fundraising journey, we had been backed by Carbon 13 before we went out to the other VCs. So we already had a kind of vote of confidence, which probably smoothed the process for us. And then they also gave us introductions to a lot of climate-focused investors who had an innate interest in our area of business. And so I think that first kind of hurdle that most founders would face of like, how do I access these people? How do I prove that this isn't this completely crazy idea? We'd already passed that by the time we went out and started fundraising. So that probably smoothed it for us as well.
Mm.
I think also, sorry, just to stay on this point, I think there's also an issue around insurtech and fundraising for insurtech, because I think if you're setting up a business in an unregulated space where you can show a lot of traction, after just building something very simple, it's a very different process of fundraising to insurtech, where you almost have, the first stage of the process is to find capacity, which can take some time, and to prove that, you actually have a product, and then obviously demonstrating, the actual premium under management. So I think that can also make the process a little bit, obviously specialist investors understand that, but that's obviously more challenging for, more conventional VCs and angel investors.
Mm. That's a really good point. I just wanted to just follow up on because you both mentioned essentially, you've got carbon 13 and then totally different angle. But the sorry, Megan, you mentioned
C Ventures.
C Ventures. It sort of demonstrates to me the sort of power of networks and networking and having that inroad. Do you think that's generally the thing that appears to be lacking, is that sort of the natural networks aren't there? Because that's obviously something that we've tried to focus in on, because it's not. My experience of VCs is that they communicate together really well. I work with some companies VC companies in the UK, and they've got really good relationships with ones in the US. They swap ideas, but you have to get into that sort of circle of trust somehow, and sort of cold speccing your deck is rarely successful, I think. So is it almost going back before we get to the VC conversation, it's more important to have an inroad to one of these networks or opportunities or innovation labs or something like that?
I mean, I think networks are everything in VC. And actually saying that, one of our angel investors, we did get through a cold intro, but that was an angel investor. And then that was sort of a super angel who then led to a lot of introductions to other VCs, which was, really amazing to have that sort of person in your stable. But I think definitely warm intros still trump anything within the sector.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the ability of VCs to communicate within themselves is amazing. Like, they just clearly are always talking. We now get intros from VCs to VCs all the time. But actually our lead investor is InsurTech Gateway.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a cold contact on our behalf. They have sort of drop-in office hours type thing. And we just submitted our deck. And I did it very intentionally, really, really early. Really embarrassing now to think back on what we gave them that first thing. But I just wanted to get their view if we were basically being too crazy about what we were thinking. And I thought they would give us an unbiased opinion on that in that kind of drop-in office hour. So interestingly, I think the network is hugely important, and our access to that network, in particular via Carbon 13, was really, really helpful. But then our actual lead investor was a cold call. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's. I was really. I was reflecting on my own journey. Obviously, this is my business. And I'm thinking I get most of my business by referral, get most of it through networking, but I've got a healthy proportion which is just cold. It's just at the right time, and it's fortunate, and it's the right contact. So I suppose it's about doing. You've got to do both, haven't you? You've got to shamelessly get in there, even when you. It's funny you saying, looking back, is like the amount of propositions you put together, and you think, oh, I'd love to go and redo that meeting.
Oh yeah, it was so embarrassing. I had no idea what I was doing.
You have to go through that phase, though.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the thing. You're not going to get to where you are now if you haven't had all those embarrassing meetings and terrible pitches.
Yeah,
and I think actually that goes back to. I mean, this isn't a massive generalization on sort of women. But you hear those things of men are more willing to sort of put themselves forward if they only have, 30% of the job spec, whereas women wait till they have 99% before they apply. And I think there's an element of that with being a founder. You need to just put yourself out there, like you just said, Alex. Like, I now just contact people left, right, and center if I want to. And sometimes I have that thought of who am I to contact this CEO of this, international conglomerate? And then I'm like, why not? Right? And actually, most of the time when I do that, people respond. So it's been that has been a really learning experience for me, that kind of just just go for it type
Mhm.
mentality. And again, you probably need that if you're going to do this. I would imagine, Megan, you probably do the same.
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, it says, I think that's the other thing. So stepping outside of the commonality you both share is that you're both leading insurtech businesses, entrepreneurial businesses. So it says something about your makeup anyway, and your character, that and you're more likely to be kind of punchy. But I think, Natalia, it's exactly the point I was thinking about as we were having this discussion, is about men are more likely to put themselves forward with less of the skill sets, and therefore they're more likely to not be embarrassed about putting in that terrible pitch deck and just given it a shot. And I think it's kind of more leaning towards that is the thing that we need to kind of try and encourage, because that's always been my experience as well. The more senior people are, the really successful people in the industry tend to be really decent human beings. That's why they've got there. So if they haven't got the time, the worst that's happened is they don't respond.
Yeah.
If they do respond, it tends to be really polite at the worst. So I wanted to kind of talk about, why is it important to acknowledge these? Why is it important to have these conversations to talk about the disparities? Why is it important for the successful startup journey?
Well, I think it can be very lonely in the startup journey, because you don't know what's happening in everyone else's pitch meetings, and you can just think, it's an internal failing of you, or this is just this is a completely this is an experience that no one else is having. So I think that's why it's really important not only to have those networks to access investors, but have networks with other founders, so people can share their journeys. And often you just see all the sort of success stories and the announcements, but you don't necessarily know what lies behind that.
That's a really good point. I think in startup land as well, isn't it? It must be, you must sit there. I don't know do you ever get round envy when you're sitting there and someone just announces this enormous round and you go, how does that even happen? Because that's what I think. Because we share all the news of people that have got funding in the insurtech sector. And outside looking in, you sort of see sort of what you think are comparable businesses, and some have raised these enormous rounds. And in your head, I presume you do the same thing I did, that once it's raised, you think, oh, it seems like an easy thing because it's just like someone's just written a check. We now, you've both been through the experience. It's much, much, much more difficult than that. Does round envy exist, or is it just something I come up with in my head?
I think it probably does, but I guess one thing I've learned a bit is, you have that, like, the round is the public perception, and the perception tends to be the bigger the better. But you also have an element of just who are the founders, and what kind of business do they want now, and what kind of business do they want to build. And in a lot of ways, maybe you take us out of this, but the best business would be the one you never raised at all. You just built a successful business, and those don't get those big, fancy, you raised X number of million, but I would love to do that. We're not going to, but that would be amazing. So I guess I try to always keep in mind, it's not just the number, it's actually, there will be an underlying thought process from those founders as to what were they trying to achieve with that round, what kind of business are they trying to build, and how does the VC round fit into that bigger vision. And it might be that you need the biggest round you possibly can, because you just want to go for it, rocket ship. Or you might be thinking in a different strategic way and think, actually, we don't need that big round. We're going to go this way instead. So I think you have to keep those two things in mind. It's not just a bigger is better necessarily.
I think also it's important to remember that the market has obviously changed very recently. So it's not really just about the amount that's raised. It's, in terms of the long-term vision, are you raising, is your post-money valuation likely to, to give all of the investors a decent return? Or you don't want to end up being in a position where you're overvalued and you're really trying to, catch up because the premium maybe isn't coming through as you're hoping. So, and, I think generally as a founder, certainly we are very just internally focused. We're just looking at what we're doing and the next milestones that we need to hit, rather than worrying too much about all of the other news that's coming out, because you just, as Natalia says, you just don't know what's happening behind the scenes there, really.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that. It's like the landscape has totally changed. I think it was really easy to be critical when the landscape did change about the businesses that were going from round to round, but it was like growth at all cost. It was like get scale, and I feel really sorry for those businesses that were built in that environment, because that was a perfectly legitimate way to go after a market and after a business. And now it's changed, and it's a bit more, grow at a steady clip, show improving ARR, for example, and then we can move forward. So and profitability, of course. So moving on on the funding piece, I wanted to start and talk about innovation. So Megan, innovation starts with leadership, or certainly that's what we would say, and it's especially crucial as you grow. How do you approach this at an NC? How do you approach kind of sort of a culture of innovation, perhaps?
I mean, I think innovation is also about sort of empowerment across the team. So, I mean, I think as a founder, you're sort of setting the vision of where we're going as a business, but I think it's also about making sure that, everyone knows where we're going, but within that, you have, sort of enough scope to really just make suggestions about how, the direction that we need to be going in. And then I think on the flip side, it's just about continuing to listen to your users and, what direction the market's going in, and just to keep adjusting the product, in order to really, meet the customer's needs and focus.
And how have you? I'm interested about culture, and you and I had a brief conversation about this before, but particularly a culture of innovation. How's it impacted by your team? Fully remote, isn't it?
Yes,
everyone's
it is,
remote
yeah.
in the business. How do you do that in a remote environment? How do you kind of build an innovative culture in that remote way?
I mean, I think we said this before. I mean, I think with remote, I think it's, it's not obviously the same as being in an office. You need to really think intentionally from the ground up of what does it mean to remote? How do we communicate? And I think the first step of that is to be, to have a lot of transparency. So we all have, one tool for project management. So there's a lot of feedback and the ability to sort of see what other members of the team are doing. You can still do a lot of whiteboarding using Miro boards in a remote manner. You don't necessarily need to be all in the same room to do that. And, I think the reason why we're remote is that, we have access to people within the team that we just wouldn't have been able to hire if we all needed to be sitting in an office in London. So, having that diversity of backgrounds, I think has been really, really helpful in building the sort of skill set and experience in the team in order to innovate in this space.
Moving on from innovation, actually, slightly on that point, this is just selfishly for me because I'm growing a remote business. How do you tackle communication? Do you have is there a stand-up every morning? Do you do it ad hoc? Do you use, what are your tools on the practical level in kind of how you tackle communication? I know you mentioned obviously sharing.
Yeah, so I think with communication, it's going to be something that is dynamic over time. So I think it's stage appropriate communication. So we are 9 people at the moment, so we do still have a daily stand up with everyone. I'm sure over time that will turn into sort of and the engineering team have a sort of separate, have an additional stand up within themselves. I think that, who has a stand up with who is probably going to change, where we're a 30-person business versus 9 people, but this is what's working at the moment. We have Monday at the moment as our project management tool, and that's for everyone, including engineering. So we don't have we've heard of businesses having separate tools for all the various different departments. So we want to make sure everyone uses the same tool and we can all see what everyone's working on. And then we use Slack as more of a kind of office cooler type approach, where you can have more informal conversations and share things there.
Nice. I'm going to take that with me. I had to turn Slack off because I kept getting added to different client Slack channels as well, and I just I've got clients in the US, I've got clients in South America, and I was just my brain was just in meltdown. So I had to turn Slack off for me, but I can understand how useful it is. Natalia, I was about. We touched on hiring there. How important is it hiring the right personality types for your culture? Because particularly you've got this kind of climate focused initiative. Does that impact on the types of person that are right for your culture, particularly when you're focusing on insurance as a social good?
I guess yes and no. I mean, it doesn't impact on the personality. I think I feel like the only person who would really want to work with us is someone who believes in what we're trying to do. Otherwise, why would they want to come and work for some crazy young startup? So I almost feel like the fact that they're going to be passionate about fighting climate change is almost just the underlying reason for why they would be interested in working for us in the first place. Beyond that, the personality types, the kind of person they are, that's the kind of thing, it doesn't matter. I think we all just need to work, well together. And that doesn't necessarily mean always being, best friends. We just need to work well together. But we definitely want to have people from all sorts of different parts of the world. And I mean, even that comes down to, again, why are we in existence? To fight climate change. Climate change impacts everybody. And it certainly doesn't impact only, well-off people in London. And so we need to be taking into account these different perspectives if we're going to build a business that is actually achieves our main goals.
That's I'm going to misquote you now, Megan. So I hope you can remember this, because I wanted to steal this from you, but I keep misremembering it. You had said something brilliant about team fit. And you said, I don't do team fit. You had some other phrase for it. It was like,
I don't know if that was me.
It was you. It was you. We had a really good conversation about it. I'll have to go back and reference and drop it in. But we were just basically talking about the concept of team fit being, it shouldn't ever be about team fit, because the idea that someone fits in is you just get this homogenous group of kind of people and values, and it's counter to innovation. It's counter to kind of DE&I initiatives. It's all in all, team fit is a terrible thing. Particularly when I think about in recruitment, how many times I get given, why has this person not been hired? Oh, they're just not the right team fit. And we used to give that as feedback, like universally. That was always the case. You think about it now, is like, I wouldn't feel comfortable ever giving that feedback to anybody. I'd be like, no, specifically tell me why you've not hired this person. And it can be because there's other candidates. That's a valid thing to say. I think now it's been about like, you were great and we like this and this about you, but this person has these other things that we do desire. But yeah, team fit was a toxic thing. I'll have to find the quote. It was very good, by the way, Megan.
I'll take that then.
Yeah. You should do. Talking about why, Megan, why has it been important for you to have sort of really strong company values from day one? Because I think that's quite difficult. Because you've got growing pressures, you've got like raising pressures, you've got there's a lot of pressures there that actually then to kind of go really hard on values is quite difficult. So why is it so important to you?
I mean, I think it's definitely partly because of being remote, is that, if you don't see each other every day physically, what brings you together and what drives how you interact with each other as a team. So, so for example, if one of our values is sort of is around transparency. So if that's a value, then, when it kind of dictates how people interact with each other, that, our default is to share information rather than to keep it sort of locked away in the various different, sub-departments, as it were.
Do you test for that, or what's the kind of process of hiring someone to kind of try and weed that out and understand their value judgment?
I mean, I think you can definitely ask some questions. I mean, obviously you can't test for it, but you can definitely ask questions about previous experiences and to see whether they're innate. So actually diversity is a really great one, because we've actually had this quite recently. So we've been hiring some people and we've been asking, what does diversity mean to you? And you can always just tell from that simple question whether, people innately understand what diversity means, or whether they've just kind of absorbed what society tells you about diversity, and it's about quotas, it's all about women, and the sorts of things that we don't believe, basically.
I agree on that. I asked that to someone once and they said it's having a team that's 50-50 men, women. That's not it. Too simplistic that.
It's not that. Try
and
again.
It's very hard to learn. It's very hard to then learn that. Or to unlearn that rather, and then to re-educate yourself about what diversity really is.
I think it is the empathy I have though is because there's so much noise, and we know now we live in a society where negative noise is louder because it gets more clicks and likes and shares. But Natalia and I have both attended this Making Change in Insurance initiative. And one thing that I reflected on the last time I was there was that it was a safe space for me to make mistakes. And I think that was something that I really needed. It's really embarrassing, but I start every conversation with, "Hi guys," and it was a little thing, and it was just a little thing I've never ever questioned. And then I was like, oh, you know, like it's this small it's this small insidious stuff that for me kind of becomes the bigger kind of problem over time, is because then you kind of ignore the things that you're doing. And I think it's like that quota conversation, 50-50. I think there's loads of people, particularly of a certain age, that would think that's what it's all about, and but they're not in those conversations, and that's why we're really conscious of, you know, we don't want to ghettoize, for example, the FLITe series. So like we want to hear from more female leaders in the space, but it would be crazy if we didn't involve like senior, you know, men within the industry, for example, because otherwise the message is just kind of staying with inside the people that go, yeah, we know, you know, we know these issues. So that's really interesting. Natalia, do you do something similar in terms of kind of looking for values? Is it all about the questioning at interview stage? Is there anything else that you put in there?
You know, I think for us, we're so young, we don't have any process for this yet. It's one of those things that I think process comes as you get bigger, but at the outset, it's just I don't know, I guess this is where it gets hard, right? So I was about to say it's just a feel, but if you go just on feel, then that feel can drive you towards people who are just like you, because it just feels right. Yep. And I think that's a challenge everyone faces. And so I think for us, it's just right now being really conscious of it. And we need to hire the best people that are right for our team, because if we don't hire those people, we're obviously going to fail as a business. And we just need to keep an eye on that. I think for the first few, you know, big hires, and if they all are exactly like us, then we're doing something wrong. You know, we're looking in the wrong places, we're asking the wrong questions, we're gauging our responses in the wrong way. In terms of broader process, I think that will come, but for us, we're too sort of, I think, young to do anything beyond just have it really forefront in our minds that we need a really diverse range of viewpoints on the team in order to be a successful business.
Yeah, I think I mean, testing's interesting because I'm qualified to do a couple of psychometric tests. I wouldn't even say they're the best ones, but I'm quite keen on it as an idea. Not as a yes or no, not as a kind of, oh, do we hire this person or do we not? Because then you can get into all sorts of, but where I think it's interesting, because it's talking about personality types, because it's talking about kind of things like values, and you can assess those sorts of things. It allows you to have a really transparent conversation as part of the interview process, and to say, right, this is what this assessment, I shouldn't say test, their assessments, this is what this assessment says about you. And you give people the opportunity to discuss it with you and you know, challenge it and really give a picture of what they are like in a day-to-day. And that's more about their behaviors at work, of course, but I think it's interesting to have that as a distinct conversation. And that's always something I advise, because you can talk about someone's history, you can talk about them as a person, but we do all lean towards people that we like or are like us. It's just a natural inclination we have. Whereas taking something like a psychometric assessment, that always seems quite valuable, because it allows you to have a conversation about values and personalities and traits. Yeah, one of mine is always that everything that comes up is that I'm actually really shy, and I don't like speaking in public, but I do it all the time, and it's because I over prep. I just have a way around it, but any assessment would say that. So the discussion is like, how do I cope with it and what do I need?
I'm the same, actually. That's funny.
Are you? Yeah. My answer is to have a Sophie, who's the marketing wizard behind all of this. I wanted to ask you both on your biggest sort of challenges and surprises in your journey so far. I don't know if they're but the same thing. I imagine sometimes they could be, but I'll go to, Natalia, you first, please.
I'll start with the challenge. I suppose, I think probably for me, the biggest challenge, and which will continue probably to be the biggest challenge, is just balancing work and my family. So I have 2 little kids. One just turned 4 yesterday, and then one 6.5. And so it's just the balance. And it's the same, to some extent, the same balance I had before when I was at FLITe & Co. But it is the balance between me and my husband, making sure, just logistically, we coordinate who's picking up the kids, who's dropping off the kids. But then really more importantly, making sure that I feel like I'm spending that kind of valuable time with them. And so if I don't feel like I'm doing that, then I don't feel good. And then I won't be good at either thing. And so with a new business, obviously it takes up a lot of my time, and a lot of my like head time, not just even my sitting in front of my desk time. So it's probably the biggest challenge is making sure that when I'm with them, so I, do drop off and I do pick, or we sort of swap. But when I have those like chunks with them, I literally just put my phone away, and I'm not kind of like, oh, let me just check that one thing and I'm going to take that one call. It's just now I'm with my kids and I'm not working. And then that means that I need to find time to work when they're not there, when they're sleeping. And so it means working later at night, and probably for the remainder of, Kita, until we're big enough business that I feel like maybe, there's someone, a COO or someone who can do some of those things. It's working, early mornings every 7 days a week, because I like to just do some work, but then have time with my kids. So that's probably going to be an ongoing challenge, but it's a challenge that I understand. And for me, I like having both things. So that works for me. The biggest surprise was the other question?
Yeah.
I don't know, but I'll say one surprise is actually, in a way, it's easier than I thought it was going to be. I don't know how you felt about this, Megan, but like the initial leap of leaving FLITe & Co. And I'm like, I'm going to start my own business. I'm going to do this. At that time, I was going to be a climate tech startup at Carbon 13. For me, this was, it was this big thing, like, oh my God, I'm doing this. But then actually, once you start doing it, you're just doing it. And it's sort of day at a time, week at a time, month at a time. And it's not as hard as I thought it would be. So that leap, once I did it, it now feels really natural. And I guess to some extent that's a surprise. And I guess to go back to the sort of more women or, more people should do this. For me, the surprise was actually, it's not as hard as I thought. And so I think now it would be something I would really suggest to people, like just try, right? What do you have to lose? If you once you become comfortable with your own personal financial buffer, whatever you have, that you don't have to make that much money for a while. Go for it. I truly don't think you have much to lose. The experience and the contacts and all of it, it's just a huge benefit.
Amazing. Yeah, I wasn't expecting to hear that. It's not as hard as you think.
It's one thing if you said, tomorrow, Natalia, you're going to be the CEO of some huge insurance company.
Yeah.
I don't know how to do that. But if you say, you're just doing it step by step, a lot of it's like, I know how to do this. I know how to speak to clients. I know how to pitch people. I know how to write strategy. Like I've done all, you just do it bit by bit. And it just sort of, I think you maybe grow with it. I don't know, Megan, you're a bit ahead of us. Maybe you might have perspective on that, but that was a surprise for me.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, sorry, Megan, what about you?
I mean, I think the biggest challenge has definitely been getting insurance capacity, like the insurance capacity that we wanted for the business. And I know that a lot of other insurtechs have struggled with that and found that journey not straightforward. So, it's, I mean, obviously in a risk averse industry with, a lot of things, it's very much set in their ways, as it were. It has been, a huge journey for us to, I guess, find a partner that's willing to, since our product is also parametric, so it's very data driven, to entrust us with not only the capacity but also our automated way of processing the claims and to give us claims authority. So we're really excited about who we're working with now, but that has been quite a long process to get comfortable with all the various aspects of what we're doing. And it will absolutely be worth it in the end, but it's definitely been through a lot of ups and downs to get to that point. Even though we were always really very, very excited about the the market opportunity and the customer demand and the the ability to scale premium, but definitely getting capacity has been the biggest challenge for us so far. I mean, I think the biggest surprise is not how easy it was for us. I mean, I think, obviously as any early stage company, like, you just go through phases and, it still I don't know when it's going to feel, I guess maybe as Natalia said, when we've got like a C-suite people below us helping to run the business. But at the moment, it still feels like, as founders, we're involved in everything, just to make sure that, we are, getting the really business off the ground. So it's not kind of smooth sailing. Maybe when when we're profitable or something. I don't know what point that comes, but no, we definitely would also recommend people taking a leap. I think in Europe, where generally people are very risk averse and very afraid of failing as a founder, and that maybe stops people from wanting to take this leap, and also maybe more I guess concerned about the sort of issue, or maybe don't have the ability not to to have that level of financial instability over a number of years. So definitely, I think if it's something that people want to do, I definitely encourage that as well. But also as a society, I think we should encourage people to do that without having that shame or fear of failure that sometimes comes with it as well.
Yeah, completely agree on that.
I definitely think culturally it's interesting talking to people. Obviously we're a recruitment business. We deal with senior people in the US and the UK. If I speak to someone in the UK who's gone out and tried something and it's not worked out, and they've come back into sort of looking for more in my world, a sort of more corporate insurance job, for example, there's definitely a sense of shame attached to that. There's always a sense of having to sort of explain away and almost hide it sometimes. They say, "Oh, I was a consultant," and put it there. Whereas in the US, it's much more frequent. "Oh, I was at a startup, didn't work, come back to the market." It's a very different conversation. No one looks at it, because I think there's an acknowledgement that there's so many lessons to learn. Myself, if I went back into working for a recruitment business, I'd be a better employee as a result of it. Like, if I'd started and failed at what I'm doing now, and I think you just learn so many things about how a business is run and the challenges as like 360, and you certainly respect your finance team a lot more, things like that. So really conscious of time. Thank you both for being so generous, and we ended on almost a bit of advice here, but is there any like more minuscule, like, I don't know, funny advice? Like, I started working in the film industry, and the best piece of advice someone gave to me was bring 3 pairs of socks to work, and that always sticks with me, because they were like, as soon as you put on a new pair of socks, you feel like a new person. And so that's my universal new piece of business advice. It's the same for running marathons. Is there one piece of advice you would give to people who are thinking about being an entrepreneur in the insurtech environment? What would it be?
Oh, I had a bit of advice that I heard recently that was really cool, is that if you take a 10-minute walk, that completely resets your energy. So if everything gets a bit difficult, or maybe to sort of end the day, just to sort of get into a different headspace, then 10-minute walk is all it takes. Nice,
like that. Natalia?
Something similar, I guess. It's just, don't completely lose your life. Like, it's I guess that classic's cheesy, like it's a marathon, not a sprint. So keep sleeping, keep eating well, keep exercising. You might have to do a little bit less of it, but don't stop it, right? Think about, how am I going to maintain this for the next 10 years? Not how I'm going to just build a business and then burn out in 8 months' time.
Yeah.
So just taking care of yourself.
Yeah, I heard I was listening to a podcast with Johnny Wilkinson on yesterday, and he was talking about compartmentalizing your life. It's like, if you're going to work and you do your thing, then you do that, but then you also kind of focus just as hard as when you're spending time with your children, or when you're spending time with your leisure activity. And there was like, that's the only way to do things. And I thought it was such good advice, because the amount of times I'm trying to do something fun, but then I'm thinking about work and I'm answering my phone, and actually I'm just doing none of those things well. So yeah, that really resonates with me.
I think another piece of advice I would give is enjoy every stage of what you're doing, because things aren't going to be going really well at every time, but if you still find something to enjoy about it as you go along, and not always be sort of looking to the future, just be in the present and enjoy where you are.
I love that. What a lovely way to end. Thank you both. It's really, really kind of you to spend the time. I really enjoyed that conversation. It's really like humanized the sort of insurtech entrepreneur piece, which I don't think we do, because I think we do focus on round raises and all of the kind of the sort of razzmatazz, the showbiz part of it, where it gets press released, but actually talking to founders about the practical steps and the physical, the taking of the leap and doing it, and the going through the stages, but enjoying it as part of the process as well. But so Natalia, Megan, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.